First of all, I'm Brian Burke. I'm the Chief Judge at Auction. Here to act as the moderator presenter, and we have three panelists. One is Judge King, who's he'll be back in a second. We have Judge Patricia Lindsay as well as Nikki Mulholland. We initially were talking about tragic events and how to resolve those issues. I think now we're going to be talking more of an open dialogue as to situations you might have dealt with, or you might have seen, or advice and things of that nature. So, take it away.
Okay. With that said, though, we're doing a very brief recap, and because we have a few new people in the room. So thank you for joining us.
Oh, my pleasure. Okay, so having said that, everybody stand up. We're going to do some more wellness exercises. Okay. One of the things that we talked about.
Here, you want to stand here? So
Well, he's got me.
I know, but you got that on your face.
That's okay. Thank you, April. Okay. This loosen everything else. And when I do this, and I start thinking about, people talk about mindfulness, and they talk about self-care and everything else, and it all goes back to whether you've been into a traumatic experience or not, how do you take care of yourself at work, okay? So let's inhale, exhale. Inhale, exhale. Shake it out. All right, let's get started.
Okay.
Excuse me, ma'am.
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right. For
Okay.
new people that have not been here, this is Judge Lindsay. She's the Chief Judge at the Cedarville Rancheria in California. My name is Lawrence King. I'm the Chief Judge for the Colorado River Indian Tribes, and I'm also a state court judge. And then I have Nikki Mulholland, who is the Tribal Court Administrator and Tribal Administrator for the Cedarville Rancheria. We did this presentation the previous hour, and what we want to do this hour is we're going to have a brief recap, as Judge Lindsay said, for the people that were not here. Blow through, but we want to have more of an open discussion and panel discussion so that, frankly, I want to pick your minds and you can pick our minds about how do we improve or some of the things that we can do better to not just do security planning, because that's I can give you books on that, but how do we do stuff to support each other and to support our staffs when there are incidents that happen in our court buildings or happens to our families that affect how our court buildings operate so that we can keep going forward. So in that particular instance, we talked about planning and managing risks. A court should have an emergency management plan that it should describe the actions that should be taken. For those that were within Judge Burke's previous seminar, he had a checklist that will be available, I believe, that talks about court security, and you should look at that. We'll talk about some resources at the end of this presentation where you can come up with templates for plans and some other materials that you may have. The emergency management planning and planning for risk has four basic core principles: your preparedness, so basically what happens in your workplace, what assessment you may have done in your workplace, prevention. Do you have a plan that will prevent or mitigate the emergencies, including trauma? What is your response going to be if something were to happen at your court facility? And then recovery, okay? And we're going to spend a lot of time talking about recovery. Try as you might, you can't prevent every incident. The best plan that you may have is great, but something is going to happen. And so when something happens, what are you going to do, and how are you going to address those particular issues? You can have all the metal detectors in the world, you can have all the x-ray machines in the world, you can have one entrance going in, one entrance going out, but if something happens in your courtroom and an individual in your courtroom, whether it be the defendant or someone else, gets hurt and you have a pool of blood, what are you going to do? Someone, and they'll address this later, comes into your court building and gets shot, and you have people that die, what are you going to do? Okay, because then you have crime scenes. And having said that, I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues because they can tell you a little bit more about what happened at Cedarville Rancheria and set the stage for some of the discussions that we're going to have today.
For the Reader's Digest version, honestly, of what happened at Cedarville Rancheria and how awful all the details were, you can Google it. There is a news aggregator website that got a lot of the facts wrong, and I'm not going to tell you which ones, but a lot. But they got a lot of the details right, which was also awful. And that is that dailynews.uk, they always aggregate all these stories and they'll have crime scene photos or other things. They actually pulled together almost every single news story that was ever out there about our incident. What I will tell you, for those that didn't hear it before, I was the new court judge. It was our very first court hearing ever. It was the first 5 minutes of the first ever tribal court hearing. This tribe is a small tribe of about 35 members.
Yes.
Total. So it's a California tribe, very tiny. There were 9 adult voting members on the day of this incident. During the incident, 3 were killed and a 4th was the shooter, so arrested. And a 5th was injured to the point of being in intensive care for a substantial amount of time and permanently physically disabled. A 6th was also injured physically and was in the hospital after the incident. A 7th was the shooter's son, who didn't show up for his hearing that day, oddly enough. So the government was crippled severely during this incident. 5 minutes into the hearing, I asked the shooter a question, and her direct answer was to pull out a gun. I asked her, what options do you have about being evicted from your housing that gives you more than 30 days to address it, something along those lines. And her answer was literally, I have other options. And she pulled out one of the 2 guns she brought with her and killed her brother. And then she proceeded, there was a pause, and then she proceeded to kill others. At my end of the phone, I asked the question. I didn't hear her answer. I heard a crash. And then it, the crashes continued after a few minutes, and I didn't know what I was hearing. It turns out it was much worse than I understood. Nikki was in the room.
I was in the room, and the aftermath of that was that we had 3 tribal members that were murdered, and our tribal administrator had been murdered as well. We had a young child, a 5-day-old child that didn't have a mother anymore. Every single one of our tribal members is related, and as in most tribes, everybody isn't related in some way. But our tribe is unique in that everybody is either a brother, sister, cousin, mother, father. That incident left us with no elders. 0. Our oldest tribal member right now is 38 years old, and he was actually just enrolled in the last 2 years. Our second oldest tribal member is younger than me. So that left our government in shambles, as Pat said. And one of the things I wanted to bring up is that the tribal court is a function of the tribe. It is an arm of the tribe. If you do not have a government to run your tribe, what are you going to do? Do you have policies in place so you can replace your government? Can you have, do you have concessions for telephonic votes? Do you have access to even make a telephonic meeting happen? Do you know any of the outside agencies that need to be involved in those? For us, the BIA had to come in to help us conduct an emergency meeting with one of our tribal members, who is now our chairwoman, who was shot 5 times as she lay in a hospital bed, just so we could have a quorum, so we could put together our broken government. Luckily, we were able to do that within 4 days.
So there are other things that could happen. I mean, yes, we went through something horrific. I have the mic back, unless I'm not loud enough. We went through something pretty horrific, but there are other things, and what we talked about in the last session, and we'll briefly recap, there are staff members that have gone home to find a family member dead. There are staff members who have been in severe car wrecks, not just at Cedarville, but other tribes I work for. Staff members that have suffered domestic violence at home or stalking at home, and they're coming to work, so they're victims of other crimes. There may be something else, like the court building burns down from an arson, or the fires in California that are happening, or wildfires anywhere. There may be building damage, a flood. So this is about, you can do all the security planning in the world, but consider the next layer of what do you need to do to prepare for some of these things. How might they affect your court?
And let me add something here. I think one of the, and it's not going to be on this slide, but the key to providing the effective response relies on the event not being defined in terms of it was a arson or something like that, but how does it have impact on the people that are in the court building, or people in the government, people in your organization? Having said that,
there are some short-term immediate effects, like if something happens in a courtroom. We had a hearing just recently at CRIT where a criminal defendant had a seizure during a hearing, during his arraignment. So, you know, you may have something immediate. Hey, we need to get medical attention, or somebody's injured, or, you know, something happens immediately in the room that has to be addressed right there and then. That's one effect. But then there's these longer term effects that maybe, oh, a hearing was disrupted. Well, when do you do his arraignment? Because the immediate effect is get him medical attention, maybe get him to the hospital, deal with that. He still has to be arraigned. There are still timelines that need to be met. So you have that. Then there are long-term effects that may happen, and we talked about some of them previously, but they may be that your staff member has PTSD from now on. And counseling and everything else in the world, I apologize. We may have triggered some of you with some of our information, and I apologize because I know how hard that is when you don't expect it and it happens. But those are long-term effects. If you know that they might happen, you can plan around them and say, oh, we know this employee went through this. If a similar situation comes up, be aware of the fact that that person may go back to that place they were a year ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Even if only for a little bit, it gives you some leeway to work around it. Internal court impacts, it could be something that you need to deal with your court rules, with your documents, with getting things filed on time. External impacts, the court users may not be able to get to your building. If it burned down and they need a copy of their divorce papers to get a passport or to get real ID, because to fly in June of 2018, you need real ID. They need to have proof their name changed. These are things that you're going to have to plan for. Let's see. So it's not just the building or the people, it's both. Go ahead. So what we're hoping is to talk about things that happen to us and what you might want to plan for. So again, we asked about, is your hearing, do all of you have your hearings recorded? Is there any court that doesn't record their hearing or use a court stenographer? Okay, it looks like everyone it does record hearings. What are you going to do, or have you ever had to deal with your recording became evidence to some other jurisdiction? Have any of you dealt with that before? I see no one raising their hands. Nikki, what did we do when our hearing became evidence in a different jurisdiction?
What did we do? We
Have to get a copy.
we had to get a copy from the Modoc County Sheriff's Department, and as Judge King had noted earlier, you only get a copy, and we also had the event on video, and it was security video. So they took our entire security system. So you have to think about that. What are you going to do? Is your insurance going to cover something like that? Are you prepared to, because we had to buy a whole brand new system. And with us being so rural, we had to wait weeks and weeks and weeks for somebody to come up and put it into the building. So in the meantime, you have a lot of people that were on edge for not having any security system. But, and then also the documents from the Modoc County Sheriff's Department as well. We didn't even really know what they had because, again, we didn't know that you could ask for an inventory of what they had.
Did you know you can ask the police department or the sheriff's department or the FBI or whoever seizes evidence from your court for an inventory of everything they took? Good to know. We didn't, Nikki didn't realize it. I didn't think to tell her. I've worked in law enforcement, but I didn't think to tell her. Judge King wasn't around us down at Cedarville, so we didn't rely on him, but it's things to know. You can get at least a list, then you know, oh, they have this item. The tribe's laptop computer was taken as evidence. The main laptop computer that was being used for all their records. We had to get it back. When it was released, it was actually released to one of the victim's family members who happened to be a non-tribal member. So the tribe had to arrange getting it back. And that's, think ahead. If you know the inventory, at least you know what to ask for and say, this belongs to the tribe. Well, they may need that for evidence in their hearing or trial, but good to know.
How many people in here are from a PL 280 state jurisdiction?
Okay.
638?
How many are from 638 states?
Okay.
That's the rest of the street.
That's everyone else,
Well, some people,
except for New York, which is a 232 state.
Or Maine.
yeah, slightly different. Okay. For those that are in PL 280, do you have working relationships with the departments that do have concurrent jurisdiction in your area?
Yeah, at times.
Yeah, okay.
I highly suggest looking at getting MOUs with those agencies that would be providing services to you in the event of an emergency. We did not have one.
And then, for those of you that are in 638 contract states, despite the fact that you may have your own police department, do you have your own fire department? Do you does your police department have some sort of understanding for mutual aid with the sheriff's department that may be close by or the surrounding towns? Yes, sir.
Well, for us, we have a cross-stabilization agreement with the county
Okay.
and the city.
Okay.
And the city and the Montana HPs. We have an agreement with pretty much everybody.
Even if you can't get an MOU to work out mutual aid law enforcement issues, maybe your tribe would consider, and the local government would consider, what to do in the event of the fires they're having in Northern California and things are seized as part of an investigation maybe that caused the fires, who knows, or like a crime that we had where documents are taken. Maybe you could get an MOU of how to address allowing the tribe to have some of those records back. I mean, there's limited MOUs, because I know the situation at some tribes is the local county and state are not gonna talk to the tribe at all. And that goes for any state, not just California. But then, think about how you can get your documents and your physical property back. if you have electronic backup, we're all big on getting grants for having case management systems. It would have been really nice to still have electronic copies of all of our files. Instead, when we get them back, they may be documents that are damaged by whatever has happened at that scene, as some of ours were. And that's not hard, that's a really difficult thing to use again. Or you've got to recreate it from scratch because nobody had a copy. There were certain documents that were signed that day that were resolutions that we never got back, and we had to address later in subsequent hearings because there was no electronic copy from day one. So it's really important to, as a good dutiful court clerk or a good dutiful judge, to say, get that filed right away, get it scanned. If there's an electronic copy on a cloud, you're safe if something happens to the physical copy. The considerations we had that we needed to address were taking time off to testify. And as I addressed, the really uncomfortable idea of, as a contract employee who works on an hourly rate for this tribe, and one of the lawyers who was in the room the entire time who survived, and the other lawyer who ended up doing all the media representation of the tribe, we sat down and talked about, how do we bill them? When I'm subpoenaed for court as a witness, but it's because I was judge for the tribe or because I was the lawyer for the tribe, am I billing the tribe? Is it not? How do I acknowledge that I did do work? This is work related, but then again, it's not because I'm a... So we walked through some really sticky ethical issues on our own part to try to be right by the tribe and yet acknowledge that we were actually doing this as part of our work. And it was hard, but we've continued a number of court hearings at the tribal court because people had to testify in the state court, or there was another hearing for the shooter and people wanted to attend. So you need to consider the time you need. Let's see. Go ahead. It's
Well,
a good one.
we talk about counseling and we talk about long-term needs. Understand that trauma arises from direct exposure, witnessing the emergency, or hearing about it. So figure out what your resources are, maybe for the people that are in concentric circles going out. Cedarville, as Nikki has told us, is not a place that has a lot of resources around there. There's no counseling that they can go right around the corner, and they may have to use telecounseling or telemed. Or they may have a town or a university that has counselors that will come down and visit because they know something happened and they want to volunteer their time.
Or you may end up in counseling with the shooter's family.
Right.
Same counselor.
Which is what happened with us, because there's so few counseling options.
What I will suggest is if you ever have something as horrific as our incident, find a counselor that does PTSD, grief counseling, and severe trauma. Because there are specialists for sexual abuse and that are really good with specific things in that area. I had a counselor who was a Vietnam vet, combat medic. And boy, at least he understood where my head was at when things would happen or I would have problems. So I was very fortunate, but I don't live in that area.
When we talk about future training,
Go ahead.
future training, active shooter, one of the things that people in my court know, I went there one day and I said, okay, you have 30 days, everybody has staff meeting, you have 30 days. I want you to go on FEMA's website, because it's a free resource. I want you to do the IS 906 training and the IS 907 training. And if you don't give me those certificates within 30 days, then I'm going to figure out how we can terminate you. Now, the IS 906 and 907 training was active shooter and workplace awareness. Okay. And I wanted that done because I needed to make sure that my staff knew if something were to happen, what they needed to do. Not only future training, but I also want to do first aid. I'm old, okay? If I have a heart attack, I want to make sure someone can take care of me so I can get at least somewhere other than the IHS hospital. I'm sorry. Gratuitous comment.
But we had to have an accommodation for one of us for the active shooter training.
Okay? She couldn't do it.
To this day, it's been almost 4 years, 3 years, 3 years this February.
2014.
And I can't do active shooter training. I'm a gun owner. I used to go target shooting with my husband. I have held a gun finally, but I cannot shoot one yet. It just, there's things, and go through active shooter training would be not a good thing for me emotionally. So I got an exemption from that one, but I did the other one.
Right, but see, and it's those types of things that there's a lot of free activities out there, there's other trainings to make sure that people will be okay. Now, when we talk about other cases that arise as a result of this incident, I think Nikki can talk about some of the stuff that happened as a result of people, the unintended consequences of what happened there.
We had a 5-day-old infant that was in the arms of his mother at the time. She was a single mom who had not named the father. So we didn't know who the father was, but we also didn't know where the baby went. The baby survived.
The baby survived, and we actually had a non-tribal family member, take custody of the child at the hospital, unbeknownst to anybody within the tribe or administrative-wise. And
State stepped in.
And so basically tracking down the child and the adult with the child. And in the meantime, that individual had asked for donations for the child. So that was something the tribe itself needed to, let people know that we're fully aware of, the situation with the child, and we'll take care of the child, and the community was not being duped into,
Fundraising.
yes, any fraudulent fundraising. So that was an unexpected thing that came up, and we actually ended up placing the child with a non-tribal member for a short amount of time.
We had to develop a social services code, move the child to the tribe's court under ICWA. We did, the tribe's attorney filed an ICWA motion to move the case to our court. The state court did not know we had a tribal court because, of course, the whole thing happened at our first hearing. And we had a social services case and then an adoption case. And then we have had probate cases that came up as a result of this. So there were cases that we didn't have codes for because it was a new court, and we didn't have any rules for, and had to figure out how do we get there and do it lawfully and make sure that it can't be questioned in some other jurisdiction.
Another thing that came up within our tribe, for enrollment, we do DNA testing for our male lineal descendants. And we had children that were eligible for enrollment, but we no longer had a father to test. And so we've been navigating the waves on that one still. And these are things that I've just noticed that have come up within, just even the tribal office aspect of the shooting that happened within our tribal court. Executing payments to family members that, for probate reasons, when you have an employee pass away, what do you do with their paycheck? You have family members coming to the office asking for paychecks for these individuals, and you can't give it to them because there are laws dictating who and when you can get those.
So try to plan for those in your communities of who actually signs the checks if these signers are not available, or if, you know, we had a tiny community. Nikki wears about 87 hats for that tribe. But in your tribe, what is the process? If this, then how do you manage to have time off even authorized? Who signs off on it? Who, if your chief judge is no longer available suddenly, who does replace them right away? We have some unusual considerations, so we talked about some of these. One of the things that came up, we've talked about some PTSD, and we will focus on that a little bit more, especially when we're having the open discussion. But the Rebels Project, I want you guys to look it up. If you have anybody in your families or friends or people close to you that were impacted by any kind of gun violence, this is a closed support group on Facebook, and they were founded by the kids that are now adults that went to Columbine High School and were affected by the shooting there. After the Aurora movie theater shooting, they felt it was important to provide support to some other people that are going through what they had experienced. And they are a godsend. I can't even say enough good things. There's no politics in there. It is strictly closed to people who have been through things like we have, where we provide each other support. But it is also the parents of people who may have died, or the siblings, or the co-workers, or someone close. So it doesn't have to be that you were there. And one of the things that we talk about is the statements you hate to hear as a survivor of these things. You're so lucky. I don't feel particularly lucky that I wasn't really there.
And that's one of those things, when you talk about PTSD and ongoing support, you have a range of emotions that will happen, from guilt to why didn't I get killed, to depression. I don't really want to go to work, bless you. You know, I can't deal with this anymore. And those are things, as a boss, you need to be able to recognize and address, as a court administrator, as a chief judge, as a judge, as a peer, to understand what your staff may be going through. You know, one of the things I said earlier, that when I have my court staff, I need to know how they're doing throughout the course of the day. You know, whether there's something that happens in their household, in their personal lives, et cetera. And I truly believe that. I tell them, I said, look, you know, I don't want to be the first phone call because you may have other people you need to talk to, but I want to be the second phone call. And I don't want to find out about it on Monday that something happened. I want to know what happened, so therefore I know what I got to do and how I got to deal with it and what kind of support I may need to bring in. And in that particular instance, you know, understand, and we'll talk about triggers, what triggers are happening, and how you can deal with those triggers. And I'm going to let Pat, and I'm going to talk about some of the triggers that may happen with Nikki. Judge?
The triggers I have is 5-day-old babies and 6-day-old babies, because my kids are having kids these days. So I started this year. You okay? Nope. Started this year with 5 grandkids, and I'm finishing the year with 10. So my kids have all figured it out, and they haven't figured out how to stop it. But in that hearing, there was a 5-day-old baby. And when I stay with my kids when they have a new child, I'm fine at 5 days, sort of. But I remember that baby had a mom, and here's my child holding their child. And then at 6 days, that baby didn't have a mother. And no father was named, so that child was an orphan. And at 6 days of my grandchildren's lives, I usually have a really hard time, and I cry a lot. And it has to do with just knowing it's unfair, because my grandchildren have both their parents. And this baby had no one as of that day. Now he's fine. He's been adopted by one of the tribal members, and he's thriving. He's absolutely delightful, but it was hard. But I want to move on to dealing with the criminal justice system. You may have to deal with an outside agency. How many of you have personal experience, not just work experience, dealing with outside law enforcement agencies? A fair number. They're not always really sensitive or kind. The DA in our case, after we testified 10 people in 2 hours, so it was about 12 minutes each. At the the death penalty portion, the penalty portion of the trial, we were each given no more than 10 minutes to name every way this shooting impacted our lives. That was it. 10 minutes. And so the chairwoman, who is now 30 years old, said to the DA, you know, I think we should have had more time to tell our side. I wanted more time to explain, and I think all of us did. And the DA actually said, why don't you all just go back to the hotel, get drunk, have a big old party, and write a letter to the editor about everything I've done wrong during this trial. That was consistent with how we were treated for 2.5 years. But that's one incident. So imagine that happening constantly. Victim witness was afraid of their boss, so they couldn't really help us. So we have rights. Marcy's Law, have any of you heard about Marcy's Law? Okay, it's a lovely law, and Marcy's Law is a victim rights law. It has been passed in California, a few other states, it's moving on, and it says that victims have certain rights to know when hearings are, to know when somebody's going to be released from custody, if their status changes on their parole, when sentencing is, when parole hearings are, and they have a right to be heard at all of these phases. There is absolutely no punishment if the system violates that law. So if the DA or the police or the parole department or any judge violates it, there is nothing, no recourse. We have rights, and they are toothless. And this crime was in California, so it's pretty frustrating.
And one of the things I want to add to that, when you talk about rights, when Nikki talked about having basically the assets of the tribe taken out of their administration so that their government could not function, you know, that tribe is an organization, and we're reminded that corporations are people, organizations could be people. At least the tribal government should at least been respected. And you know, I don't know the circumstances because I haven't been there to see what their security system may have looked like, but you don't have to take the whole thing out. They could have provided some information for them so that they can continue to operate. And I think that's one of those situations where understand, and the people that come in, you know, I realize that they have to do a job and they're investigating an incident and going forward, but all too often we don't find that our law enforcement investigators understand a trauma-informed lens, and I can speak from that from experience. When I came home one day from a conference to see my house being burnt down, and a person, one of the firefighters came to me, and captain, and says, "Is this your house?" I said, "Yeah." And he started asking me a million and one questions. I said, "You know, first of all, you understand that's my house and it's burning down." And it's routine for him. And then he apologized. He said, "Well, let's talk about this a different way." So, stand up for yourself at times. Understand what happens. Understand that you may not be able to stand up for yourself, but if you have a peer, stand up for your peer.
One of the other things that happened at Cedarville is that the tribe's cultural leader was killed. He was the first person killed. The elder that knew the entire culture for this tiny tribe died. Their medicine person also was killed. So we have fought with victim witness and with the state of California to get funds to bring someone in to teach those who are still there their own culture. And to get the funds to do that, even though we have the right to that, is a fight. I was arguing with the Attorney General's office less than a month ago about that. We have some resources that we wanted to talk about, but I do want to get to your questions and your comments. So I want to move us through actually to, this is all going to be available on the website. We've said that before. Tell me about your situations. What have you had happen that you've overcome in some way? Anything that this brings to mind. Have any of you had to recreate court records that were lost due to an incident of any sort or whatever? Go ahead.
So we had.
It's there.
Okay, so we had. Geez, I don't know, what was it, about a year ago now? Okay, so we had two clerks, just one. Okay, one clerk. Sorry, I can remember if the other one was there, but they're younger. Some of our clerks are younger, so they still go out on the weekends, and that's fine. It doesn't affect their job, so we don't care. But so she happened to be outside. Two guys get in a fight. One guy stabs the other guy in the neck. She winds up being the person who's holding the guy as he's sitting there dying. So we were completely unprepared for it. We didn't know how to. She shows up for work when we all go, should she be here? You know, we didn't know if we wanted to encourage her to go home, if we wanted to just let her keep working. We had to coordinate with the prosecutor's office to make sure that they weren't, you know, whatever documentation they were bringing over concerning that case needed to go to the other clerk, just so she didn't have to deal with the paperwork. And, you know, it was just it was something that we just hadn't anticipated and hadn't been, you know, dealt with on how to
Nikki
manage
was the court
support it.
clerk for us, and as a result, we had they hired another person so that they could have a separate clerk address conflict cases. So yes, the same type of thing. Have other people, does that bring anything to mind with any of you on addressing conflicts? How did you, I want to ask you, how did you address her trauma in the workplace?
Okay, she did wind up on administrative leave, I guess, for other.
Okay. Was she out permanently or just for a time?
No, she was out for 2 weeks.
Okay. Does this bring to mind any other comments that any of the rest of you want to share? Okay. We can fill the time, so we're going to do some of the breathing techniques. Do you have other things?
You go. I have more, but you can go do trigger techniques, please.
Okay.
Okay.
So, as I said, I got really fortunate. I did not have the counselor that Nikki had that was the same counselor for the shooter's son, who may be an unindicted co-conspirator. Whole nother story. Anyways, I had a great counselor, and he had offered some techniques for me. I went to him because I was trying to find out about something called EMDR. Who has heard of the EMDR? By a show of hands, nobody. It's eye movement, I forget, it's like rapid eye movement type of counseling. They have a light that blinks, and it's not hypnosis, but it kind of distracts your mind while you talk through your incident, and it actually helps you process to not have that same level of panic when you rethink your incident. I learned about it when I was a state prosecutor that handled child molest cases, and I had a child molest survivor who was an adult who had gone to counseling because of how bad his his particular victimization had been as a child. And he came forward when he turned 18 and wanted the case prosecuted. So it was my case. I learned he was able to talk about it in such a calm manner because of this counseling method. So I had to learn under California law, it's not hypnosis, it doesn't change your memory in any way. So, you know, okay, I could admit it in court. It is really helpful for some people, not everyone, but some people, for working with PTSD. So write down EMDR. There is actually, you can Google that information, but there is a place that specializes in teaching counselors how to provide that type of counseling. So that was one. I went to him for that, and I found someone that does that. He taught me other methods. They ended up working for me. And so I did not do the EMDR. One of them is breathing. So we're going to call it 7-4-8 breathing. And I want you to do this with me because I want to relax everyone. We've been talking about tense things, and I can feel the tension in my shoulder. So we're going to breathe in on a 7 count, hold it for 4, and then exhale, forcing it out through pursed lips on an 8 count. So everyone with me, ready? Inhale. Hold. Exhale. Let's do that again. Inhale on 7. Ready? Hold. Exhale. Feel a little more relaxed? A little bit? One more time. Inhale. Hold. Exhale. As I explained earlier today, but for the ones that just joined us, that forces oxygen into the deepest parts of your lungs. It forces you to relax by releasing some enzymes into your body that you get from very deep breathing. The pursed lip pushing the air out keeps the air in your lungs at the deepest part a little bit longer. Another thing I use is doing math problems, even if you're not good at math. Any kind of addition or subtraction or any math in your head. If you're starting to have a panic attack, start doing math problems, because if you're doing them in your head, you can't think about whatever it is that's making you scared or panicky. I don't even go beyond addition and subtraction. I don't even bother with multiplication or division or, parenthetical problems or anything. Just go for it. Another thing is to run random numbers through your head. Just concentrate on thinking of the next random number. As high as you want: 1,352, 2, 75, 9, 155, 317. Keep running random numbers through your head. If you're concentrating on those, you'll stop thinking about the thing that's triggering your panic. Another thing is 20 minutes a day walking. It gets both sides of your brain going, both the right and the left, and it crosses signals from the right to the left because your right hand is connected to the left side of your brain, your left hand connected to the right side, same with your feet. So it crosses signals, which jumbles up the panic, focusing into just one area of your brain, and it helps. And then the other one is butterfly tapping. So everyone cross your arms over your heart. Fingertips, tap on your collarbone, just very lightly. And that also crosses the signals because your right hand is tapping on your left side, your left hand is tapping on your right side. So somehow it crosses signals, and it just helps the panic go away by he explained all the physiological reasons behind it. I wish I remembered, but I'll just throw the damage in. I'm a lawyer, not a counselor, but I've been to one. Go ahead.
The other thing that I would suggest, tribes have medicine men, some do, some don't, or tribal elders that will sit and help you out and talk with you and seek them out. And that will help. And it's not woe is me, but understand that a lot of people have done a lot of things to give you adverse childhood experiences. So let's figure out how we can counteract those and do it culturally and with tradition.
Nikki, what things do you want to add to everybody? What's helped you?
This helped me.
Mhm.
One of the symptoms of PTSD that I suffer from is I tend to push everybody away. And I don't leave my house very often, and I'm not very social. And so one of the things that has helped me is I did seek out a counselor. I finally found a counselor. She's new to town. So she doesn't know anything about me. So I sought out a really good counselor, and I practice some of the mindfulness exercises that she has given me. And I make a point now to, if I'm not in physical contact with people, I do try to make sure that I keep in contact with people. Social media, I've apologized to Pat a couple times. Sorry, I don't answer the phone, or sorry, I don't answer back. I try to be mindful of the things that I do. And I actually spend a lot of time with my kids, and that makes me very happy. And animals. I never said I would get animals because I have a bunch of kids. And so now I have 2 dogs, 6 chickens. We do show pigs.
Yes,
So
you do.
I really want a llama. So I do find that therapeutic in spending time with the animals and taking care of the animals, and it kind of distracts you from some of the internal things that are going on in your mind when you have when you're going through some
And we
trauma.
had, you raised your hand.
My question was for you. Are you still a judge?
Yes, I am still chief judge at Cedarville. It's entertaining at times to get the motions to recuse me and disqualify me because I presided over a shooting. The first one really threw me off because it made no sense to me. Why does that matter? And then there was a motion to disqualify the entire court and move it to state court because people died in this court, so no one's safe. I'm like, the whole hearing's telephonic. What are you talking about? So, but I stayed on, and in fact, because I'm older than their oldest tribal member, although I'm not a member of that tribe, I'm kind of their grandmother. I'm kind of their auntie. I won't leave them. I may not be their judge forever, but I won't leave them because they kind of became my kids after that day.
And I am definitely their mom.
Yeah, so I'm kind of the grandmother auntie. I'm not that old, well, maybe. Anyway,
They're youngsters.
and I'm a
Yes,
judge
they are very
for
young.
Cedarville, and I'm an appellate judge for Bishop, and an appellate judge for my tribe, St. Regis Mohawk.
Still being a judge, you preside over children's cases possibly. Does that affect you like in other tribal courts because you are in the courtroom? You're present in the courtroom?
Not really. What do you think?
I assign cases, so I'm cognizant of what and who I'm going to assign cases to. She'll have some juveniles, but I'm not going to let her do something that I think that's going to have a trigger. And I trust her enough that if I give her something, that she'll give it back to me, saying, I don't think I can handle this. Give it to another judge.
I would.
So
I would speak up if it's something I can't do. And,
Yeah.
you know, there have been times that I find there's a conflict for other reasons, but generally at Cedarville, it's interesting. It was hard to do other eviction cases, and the first time I did a housing eviction case at Crit after Cedarville, I was a little uncomfortable, but just kind of said, I'm a judge. You have a duty to preside over a case, to decide a case. So I kind of pushed myself and did it. I'd like to hear from you, though. What could we have done? What other things do you suggest that you have in place at your court that would be helpful to us to adopt at Cedarville or Crit or any other court? You guys must have dealt with things.
Is your tribal court staff, do they have a separate, this is a thing to know, do they have separate HR policies than from, like, say, the tribal office staff?
At Bishop, no, it's the same.
It's the same? I would make sure that you know what those policies are, because that is going to dictate a lot of, if people can take the sick time, vacation. We actually can't, me, myself, as tribal administrator, I can't allow administrative leave unless the chairperson says so. So those are things to know, and if those are things that need to be addressed to council and maybe changed or looked at for emergency purposes, I would suggest that, because these things came up in our situation, and we have the same employee handbook as well. So some of these things came up, like, oh, we definitely need to address those. And then are you allowed to say, I have a lot of sick time saved up. Can I give some of my sick time to maybe somebody that needs it because they are recovering and before they come back to work, or things like that? Is there a procedure behind it? If not, you should maybe look at doing that.
Yeah, the Washoe tribe has that, where we could donate time to someone else. So when there was somebody that was severely injured, we could donate time so that they could stay off work if I had sick time I wasn't going to use.
And one of the things I would recommend is come up with a resource list, like what counselors we have in the area. You may never need them, but, ask those particular questions. Is there a map or a building plan of where we operate the court? Okay.
Yes, Joyce.
A question. A lot of tribes you have a main building, and then we all have a lot of mobile homes around for other offices.
Right.
So
right.
how do you, like if something happens at the tribal office, I've often wondered, how am I going to let those other departments know that are in those trailers, not to come to the main office because something's happening. There's no way of, and then we used to have the health project just across the courtyard. We shared the same courtyard. So if an incident was happening in the tribal office, you would still have people coming to go to the health clinic. And it's like,
Right.
I think we all share in that problem. How do you?
That's one of those situations where you need to sit down with the people in those particular buildings. There's software out there that you can use to notify other buildings with code words that, there's something happening here. We're in lockdown mode. Identify a person that is going to be the person to notify everybody else, and when that person's enabled, who's the secondary person? Okay. And it goes back to sometimes you may have a person for your organization or your tribe that's the overall emergency planning person. Okay, so ask them, do you have this in place? It's like what is our protocol if something happens in our building or happens in your building? How do we know? How are we notified? And where do we go? And what's our lockdown procedure? Or do we have a lockdown procedure? Do we escape, etc.?
So we're currently working with our community college, Fort Peck Community College, because they have what you'd call a reverse 911 system.
Right.
So somebody triggers it, calls go out if there's a situation. And that's what we're working on, working with them to develop so we can reach out to our prosecutor, public defender, probation office that are not directly linked to our building. They're across the street. So that way they can, or if they're out in the field, they, like our process server is always out in the field. So then she doesn't roll up and have no idea what's going on.
We have, I have a family member that you'll hand it around?
Yeah.
Okay. I have a family member that works for a company that does something like that, and it's a company, so there are more than one, I'm not gonna name the company, but they will send out not only an email notification, but it's a lock screen at every desk at that entity that hires them, that your screen locks up with emergency situation lockdown imposed. Nobody can use their computer until they clear that. It also immediately sends out a text. It also sends out other notifications at their facilities. So you can get like a phone call, a sound alarm, or a silent alarm, or these notifications going out to all the other offices. And, there's software out there, there's companies that sell it. So it can be done.
But even if you can't afford that, let's use low tech. Get a list.
Yeah.
Paper and pencil, write down everybody's cell phone number. Is that if something happens, we need to call. So who's responsible for this phone tree? Who's responsible for that phone tree? And we go from there.
So it was asked just sort of generally like what could we do or what does our court do? So something that we implemented recently was we have an actual administrative order from our chief judge that states how things pass down like hierarchically. So in the event the chief judge is not available, I'm the senior. I got the most seniority, so I become the acting chief, and so on down. We did the same thing for our court administrator. It was step one is pretty easy because it goes to our deputy. But after that, then we had to figure out who's below that in the event of an emergency. So
And that's good to have. I heard that, and I asked their chief judge, he said no, but Salt River FEMA supposedly went through all of this and went through every single department, how it operates and what the chain of command is in an emergency. Where do they hold their operations if this building is not available for their usual operations? If this is disrupted, how do they get communications out? How do they reestablish records that are lost? Where do they store them? So some tribes are working on that. Others have thought about it. I urge you to do, unlike us, we haven't done it yet either. It's a thing to do, plan for it.
In a perfect world, we'd have more people helping us out, okay? But typically, we're small operations. Unlike my good friends at Salt River that have a brand new building that took all that stuff in there, I'm jealous of them. Or my friends over at Wallapai that have, understand, do a little bit a day. Maybe spend a half an hour a day on a plan, or create a checklist and spend a half an hour a day on courtroom security, courtroom planning, what resources we have, who are lined up. Can we do a tabletop at lunch? Bring in lunch for everybody. Let's talk about what happens, how are we going to marshal the resources, and how do we address the situation? And pick a situation. If we have a shooting in the court, what happens? We have a fire in the court, what happens? We have a flood because one of the pipes breaks or the sewer backs up, what happens? If we have blood that because we have a hazmat situation, what happens? Or if somebody calls in because tribes now are going to become low-hanging fruit, and apparently they're hacking computer systems, that one threatens the tribe with sarin gas, what happens? Are we downwind, upwind? Do we have antidotes? Do we have a decontamination station ability to set up? Involve the fire department. Have them come over. So, let's have a fire drill. Pick a time. We're gonna tell two people, so that we don't mess up everything, but pick a time, we're gonna have a fire drill. Let's find out how bad we really are, and then go from there.
Any final closing remarks, Nikki, that you want to share?
Just that you can never plan for anything like this, ever. And there are multiple different levels and situations where trauma can come into the courtroom. And I just hope that any of the information that you did get from us today will help you in mitigating any of the emergencies that may come up in your courts. And if you ever have any questions or anything that you think I might be able to help you with, please reach out.
Thank you. You have evaluations.
There you go.
Make sure you fill those out, please. And likewise, ditto. The email is up there, so if you have a question, hopefully I'll be on the bench a lot more. But if I'm not on the bench, I will get back to you.
This is our first time talking publicly about this, so thank you for being kind and gentle to us during this, because it's not easy, but we've decided we have to help others get through what we've been through and deal with it if it ever happens in your future. So thank you for listening to us.